I never thought the land I was born on, the land where I learned to ride a bike, where my father taught me how to work the soil and respect the earth, would one day become a battlefield. Not a battlefield of nations, but of greed, pride, and power. My land wasn't just property. It was memory. It was blood, sweat, and years poured into something that could not be measured in dollars. Yet the HOA thought otherwise. To them, it was a prize, a plot of earth they could seize, profit from, and bend to their will. And when their lawyers, fines, and lawsuits didn't work, they crossed a line I never thought possible. They sent hired guns to take what was mine. That was the moment I decided, if they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I would turn my land into something they'd never expect, a minefield. From the beginning, I wasn't looking for trouble. My life was simple. I had a cabin my father built with his own hands, a garden my mother once planted, and a creek where my brothers and I used to fish as boys. I raised chickens, kept 2 loyal dogs, and lived without bothering a soul. Then, one day, strangers moved in. Developers bought up the properties around mine, cutting them into neat little parcels and building cookie-cutter homes. Along with those homes came the HOA, bringing their glossy brochures, promises of community standards, and their smug rules about everything from the color of your roof to the number of plants in your yard. I ignored them. My land had been mine long before their subdivision existed. I never signed anything. I never agreed to their authority. And that infuriated them. At first, it was letters. They cited violations for things like storing tools outside or keeping chickens. When I ignored the letters, they escalated to fines. Hundreds, then thousands of dollars. I laughed at them. They had no legal power over me, and I knew it. But they didn't expect me to resist. Most people bent under their weight. Most people gave up. I wasn't most people. My father had always told me, a man's land is his soul. If you give that up, you give up everything. I lived by that creed. When letters and fines failed, they tried lawsuits. I stood before a judge, presented my deed, and explained I was never part of their HOA. The case was dismissed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The HOA wasn't used to losing. They weren't about to let a stubborn old landowner stand in the way of their expansion. So they turned to intimidation. At first, it was cars idling near my fence late at night. Then it was men in suits showing up at my gate, telling me, everyone has a price. I told them mine was simple. I wasn't selling, not for all the money in the world. Their smiles turned to scowls. And soon after, the real trouble began. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, I heard the rumble of engines. 3 black pickup trucks pulled up along the dirt road by my property. Out stepped men dressed in tactical gear, carrying rifles, their faces shadowed by ball caps. My stomach clenched. These weren't lawyers or HOA board members. These were mercenaries. I ducked back into the shadows of my cabin, heart pounding as I watched them spread out. One of them laughed, his voice carrying in the still air, "Boss says we rough him up a little, he'll sign. Easy money." That was when I realized what I was dealing with. They weren't just after my land. They were willing to break me to get it. I could have left. I could have packed up, sold my soul, and walked away. But something inside me refused. This was my land, my heritage. If I gave it up, I'd betray everything my family ever stood for. And so, I turned to the lessons my father taught me. He'd been a soldier, a man who survived wars not by being the strongest but by being the smartest. He used to say, a battlefield is about perception. Make them believe they've walked into hell, and they'll run from shadows. That became my plan. I didn't use real mines. That would have been illegal, deadly, and reckless. Instead, I built what I called a psychological minefield. I spent nights digging pits lined with sharp stakes, not enough to kill, but enough to wound pride. I strung barbed wire in hidden places, buried pressure plates that set off blinding floodlights and ear-splitting sirens. I rigged fireworks in the trees, waiting for a tripwire to set them screaming into the sky. I even set up speakers that blasted recordings of dogs snarling, giving the impression I had a pack of wolves waiting in the dark. Every corner of my land became a fortress, designed not to kill, but to terrify. When the mercenaries returned, the traps were waiting. The first man who vaulted the fence landed square on a plate that set off a siren so loud it rattled windows. Floodlights blazed to life, turning night into day. Another stumbled into a pit, cursing as he clawed at the stakes that tore his clothes. Fireworks burst overhead, filling the sky with fire and thunder. My dogs barked from the porch, their deep growls echoing like a promise of violence. The mercenaries panicked. I could see the fear in their eyes as shadows twisted into monsters around them. They fired a few warning shots into the air, but the sound only seemed to bounce back, amplifying their fear. By the time I stepped onto my porch, shotgun slung casually over my shoulder, they were already scrambling back to their trucks. The police arrived minutes later, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Neighbors had called after hearing the chaos. At first, the mercenaries tried to spin the story, claiming I'd attacked them. But my cameras told the truth. Every step of their trespassing, every threat they made, every moment of their panic, it was all caught on tape. The officers shook their heads, disgusted. "The HOA hired these men," one of them muttered. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is criminal." The case against me evaporated. Instead, the law turned on them. The HOA president, the smug man who thought he could bully me, found himself facing charges of conspiracy, harassment, and even attempted assault. The hired guns. They scattered, some arrested, some slinking away into the night. My land remained mine, untouched. My cabin still stood, my chickens still clucked, and the creek still sang its quiet song. Even now, years later, I sometimes walk the boundary lines of my property. I see the filled-in pits, the rusted wires, the places where I built my minefield. They remind me of a lesson burned into my heart. Bullies thrive on fear, but when you stand your ground, when you refuse to bow, you become unshakable. The HOA thought they could scare me, crush me, buy me. Instead, they taught me to rise higher than I ever thought I could. The land is still mine. The fight was long, brutal, and frightening, but it proved something my father always said was true: home isn't just where you live. It's where you take your stand.